Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. We are proud of you. Hare Krishna. So we'll continue tonight reading of Prabhupada Lilamrita. Any reflections where we are here? Where is Prabhupada now? Memory is so short.
He's in Mayapur.
Yes. Mayapur project development. He came for a month or something, right?
Yeah.
He has a big plans for the Mayapur development. He formed Vrindavan Mayapur Trust, right, to support these projects, both Mayapur and Vrindavan project. And he's personally kind of looking into it. Devotees are living austere in the sense, it's hard to believe that they put so much of sacrifices for us, for Krishna. Anything else?
He also started to translate the Chaitanya Charitamrita.
Right, yes. He taught how to keep the things, room and everything, nice cushion and clean daily. Hare Krishna Ajay, you look different. Are you not home tonight?
I just, my power went out and I'm just wait. It just came back on. So I got to wait for my computer to boot up. So I'm on my phone.
Okay. What did you say, Gaurav?
Whenever guests come over, devotees should have puri.
He offered the guest puri, eggplant sabji, sweet.
He expressed his gratitude for all the devotees helping in the Mayapur mission.
Yes, for their sacrifices. He literally felt very grateful for all the disciples. That's amazing. Serving together, working together for mission of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Okay, so maybe we can continue now. In distributing love of Godhead, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and his associates did not consider who was fit, candidate, and who was not, nor where such distribution should or should not take place. They made no conditions. Wherever they got the opportunity, the members of the Panchatattva distributed love of Godhead. For Srila Prabhupada, this verse directly confirmed the instructions he had received from his spiritual master. We already, I'm just repeating. Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur that people of all births could become Vaishnavas, Brahmanas and Sannyasis. Here was direct evidence from the scriptures. Did we finish all these things?
Yeah, I think we finished. We were reading about the paragraph where he was saying that there is no American Hindu.
I think that's the one then.
He said in the end we stopped at we should strictly follow the principle of Panchatattva.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah, I think that is the same one, Prabhu, like the strictly follow, the one that you were reading.
Same one, right? Okay, right.
Yeah.
Okay, very good. Yeah, so we read this. After criticism, Srila Prabhupada encountered was that his emphasis on proselytizing. How you spell it, pronounce it? Proselytizing?
Yeah, proselytizing. Yep.
Proselytizing.
Converting people. Going out,
is it?
preaching and converting.
Oh, yeah. Was actually alien to Indian spirituality. That's right. Alien to Indian spirituality. That's why Indian System is suffering, isn't it? Funny. Even Prabhupada's godbrothers had occasionally made such remarks. More often, however, this sentiment came from the impersonalists who argued that people should be left to conceive of religion in their own way. So much bogus. Religion, being an internal spiritual effort, should not be propagated by jealous evangelism. Preaching and conversion, they said, were for the Christians and not for the followers of Indian religion. In the 7th chapter of Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Lila, however, Sri Krishna Chaitanya, the Supreme Personality of God, reveals his heart and emotions as the ideal preacher. Although the members of the Panchatattva plundered the storehouse of love of Godhead and ate and distributed the contents, there were no scarcity. For this wonderful storehouse is so complete that as the love is distributed, the supply increases hundreds of times. The flood of love of Godhead swelled in all directions, and thus young man, old man, and women and children all were immersed in that inundation. The Krishna conscious movement will inundate the entire world and drown everyone, whether one be a gentleman, a rogue, or even a lame, invalid, or blind. When the first 5 members of the Panchatattva saw the entire world drowned in love of Godhead and the seed of material enjoyment in the living entities completely destroyed, they all become exceedingly happy. The more the 5 members of the Panchatattva caused the rains of love of Godhead to fall, the more the inundation increased and spread all over the world. I really want to emphasize on this primarily. So here, there are some rascals who are to dare to speak against the mission of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, criticizing the Krishna conscious movement, for accepting Europeans and Americans as Brahmanas. See, they have all reason to oppose this movement. They cannot do it. Once they do it, they will not accept them, so that they feel their position is in stake. So now criticism is coming. Well, proselytizing was actually alien to Indian spirituality. It's for Christians and Muslims. Well, that's why they've been successful. Can you believe you all see this? No? So that we don't have to preach anything. I don't know from where this Mayavad thought has come to people's mind. You don't have to preach a Bhagavad Gita. You don't have to preach our God. Till now, this concept is, let people be as they are. Automatically, they become, there are so many foolish teachers still claim that, you don't need any teaching, you don't need any guru, you just evolve yourself. Till now, it is very prominent that Mayavada concept is very prominent. I say you cannot preach, you don't have to preach, you don't have to convert. So they should be left off conceive of religion in their own way. How can some religion can come just like that without preaching? But this is not Chaitanya Charitamrita Adi Lila, where Supreme Personality of God reveals his heart emotions to the ideal preacher. Panchatattva, the members of the Panchatattva, they had immense love of God, and they were preaching everybody, they're spreading everyone. When they saw that materialistic people were giving up their materialism, so material desires, so they were feeling very happy in all ages, young, old, women, children, everyone was immersed in that inundation of love of Godhead. So, did I read this one? This was Srila Prabhupada's spirit in training young men and women in the International Society for Krishna Consciousness. And he was offering these words of Lord Chaitanya to strengthen all the Lord's devotees. The members of Krishna Conscious movement should be confident that by preaching purely, they would meet this with success. Prabhupada was confident. Here were the words of Shastra, words spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and Prabhupada's personal experience confirm the same. Thus, He could write. Okay. What he's writing, we will hear about it. Second to read it.
Our Krishna consciousness movement was started single-handedly, and no one provided for our livelihood. But at present, we are spending hundreds and thousands of dollars all over the world, and the movement is increasing more and more. Although jealous persons may be envious, if we stick to our principles and follow the footsteps of the Panchatattva, this movement will go unchecked by imitation swamis, sannyasis, religionists, philosophers, or scientists, for it is transcendental to all material considerations. Therefore, those who propagate the Krishna consciousness movement should not be afraid of such rascals and fools. The verses of the 7th chapter describe the worldwide inundation of Krishna consciousness. Thus, the objections that Europeans and Americans could not become Brahmanas or sannyasis would be swept away as Lord Chaitanya's mercy flooded the entire world. Nothing could check it. The words of Krishnadas Kaviraj intensified Prabhupada's desire to base his worldwide movement in the land where Lord Chaitanya appeared and began his Sankirtan movement. The Panchatattva had begun in Navadvipa, and from there the waves of the love of Godhead were swelling outward. In Sridham Mayapur, there is sometimes a great flood after the rainy season. This is an indication that from the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya, the inundation of love of Godhead should spread all over the world. For this will help everyone, including old men, young men, women, and children. The Krishna consciousness movement of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is so powerful that it can inundate the entire world and interest all classes of men in the subject of love of Godhead. In the 7th chapter of Adi Leela, Prabhupada found many other evidence authorizing ISKCON under the principles of Lord Chaitanya's teaching and activities. Krishnadas Kaviraj says that Lord Chaitanya's taking sannyas was a trick for delivering certain classes of society who would otherwise not have shown him respect. Prabhupada in his commentary explained that he also had devised schemes for offering the benefits of Krishna consciousness to as wide a spectrum of society as possible. And he cited his acceptance of women into Krishna consciousness movement. Therefore, it is a principle, he wrote, that a preacher must strictly follow the rules and regulations laid down in the Shastra, yet at the same time devise a mean by which the preaching work to reclaim the fallen may go on with full force. So basically, Srila Prabhupada is mentioning here that the Krishna consciousness movement, like whoever is part of ISKCON, they should be confident, and that by preaching, they will be surely met with success. And these are the words spoken by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, and Prabhupada's personal experience also was the same. So he could write that even though our movement was standard single-handedly and no one provided like any for livelihood or any donations, but now it has spread that we are spending hundreds and thousands of dollars, and the movement is increasing more and more. Even though there are many people who would be jealous, if we stick to the principles and follow the footsteps, then this movement cannot be stopped by any other like swamis or sannyasis. And who propagate the Krishna consciousness movement, they should not be afraid of such rascals and fools.
It cannot be unchecked by imitation swamis or sannyasis.
Yeah, imitation.
Okay.
And then it also it says that the inundation of Krishna consciousness basically it flooded the entire world, and no one could stop it. And this the verses in the 7th chapter of Sri Chaitanya Charitamrita basically intensified Prabhupada's desire that he should have the base of ISKCON in Navadvip, basically where Lord Chaitanya started the Sankirtan movement. And from there, it was inundating the whole world. And it gives an analogy that sometimes there is a great flood after the rainy season. And similarly, from the birthplace of Lord Chaitanya, the message of Godhead will be spread all over the world, including everyone, young men, women, children, and old men. I think that's it.
So it is a principle, and women also is involved. This is the only first, you can say, movement where women were part of the movement all over the world. In ISKCON society, though so many people are, have criticizing human about humanist and this and that, but human is also as part of the same many incidents we read in the past, right? Yeah, AJ, you can read.
June 27, 1973. From Mayapur, Srila Prabhupada went to Calcutta. He wrote to Tamal Krishna Goswami. There is a suggestion by Shyamsundar that I may go to London for meeting very important men there in new house given us by George. But I think to make some definite settlement of Bombay affairs before I return to Europe or America. But I want to make some definite settlement of Bombay affairs before I return to Europe or America. If there is a suitable place for me to stay for a few days in Bombay, I can go there immediately, and from there I may go to London. While considering his itinerary, Prabhupada passed some days in the Calcutta temple on Albert Road. He was very free about allowing people to see him, and his room was often filled with local Bengalis as well as his own disciples, seated on the white sheet before him. In the evenings he would go, even when it meant riding for miles through congested parts of the city, to spend an hour in someone's home preaching Krishna consciousness. Srila Prabhupada's sister, Baba Tarini, known as Bhishma to Prabhupada's disciples, would also visit the Calcutta temple to see her beloved brother, and as usual, to cook for him. One day, however, a few hours after eating her kachoris, Prabhupada felt sharp pains in his stomach. He closed his door and went to bed. His followers became very concerned. When his servant, Shruta Kirti, came into the room, he found him tossing. Srila Prabhupada, what's wrong? My stomach, Prabhupada replied. That coconut kachori, it was not cooked. The seizure continued all night, and several devotees continually massaged Prabhupada's body, especially his stomach. But with every breath, he would moan. Bhishma was standing. Is that how you say that, Bhishma?
Yeah, Pisima.
Okay. Bhishma was standing by, but
Pisima means aunt. It's a father's sister is called Pisima.
Okay.
So Prabhupada asked all his disciples to call her Pisima.
Like a term of endearment. Yeah. Okay. So Pisima was standing by, but Prabhupada's disciples feared her presence, thinking she might want to cook something else for him, even in his illness. Prabhupada asked that the picture of Lord Narasimha be taken from the altar and put beside his bed. Some devotees feared that Prabhupada might be about to pass away. The next morning, when the illness continued, the devotees called for the local Kaviraja, Ayurvedic doctor. The old Kaviraja came and diagnosed Prabhupada's illness as severe blood dysentery. He left medicine, but it was ineffectual. Later, when Prabhupada called Bhavananda to his room and requested fried puris and a little patala, an Indian vegetable similar to a small squash, and salt, Bhavananda protested. Such fried foods would be the worst thing for him. Prabhupada said that this was blood dysentery cure his mother had given during his childhood. He then called for his sister, and speaking to her in Bengali, told her to prepare puris and patal. A few hours later, after making the food, Prabhupada again called Bhavananda. He was feeling better. My mother was right, he remarked. A lengthy telegram arrived from Shyamsundar glorifying the preaching opportunities that awaited Prabhupada in London, where he would be picked up at the airport in a helicopter and flown to the main event, the greatest Ratha Yatra ever held. The parade would proceed down Piccadilly Lane, climaxing under a large pavilion at Trafalgar Square. The telegram went on to say that millions of Englishmen, including certain very important people, were eager to see Srila Prabhupada, and that arrangements were underway for Prabhupada to instruct the Queen's eldest son, Prince Charles, in Krishna consciousness. So it talks about how, Prabhupada, before he left, he was going to head to London to meet with people about Bhaktivedanta Manor, but first he wanted to figure out a couple things before he went. So he was staying in Calcutta trying to figure out what his itinerary was going to be, but he was still meeting with people every night. He just let people come and go as they please and was happy to see people. And then he would also, go to some other folks' house every night to preach Krishna consciousness as well. And then, his sister would come every day and to see him and cook for him. And one day she made kachoris, I guess coconut kachoris, and they were a little undercooked, and as a result, Prabhupada ended up with stomach pains, and they he was up all night, and the devotees were there trying to they were massaging his body and rubbing his stomach and trying to ease his pain, but they were starting to get a little worried that they were going to lose Prabhupada. And I like that they were like Pishima standing there, but all the disciples were worried that she might try to cook him something again, even though he's sick. Like, you already made him sick. Stop trying to cook more for him. But then, so Prabhupada, he said, hey, bring me the picture of Lord Narasimha and put it next to my bed. And that, that made the devotees even more worried, it sounds like. And then they finally called an Ayurvedic doctor who came in and said, oh, you have blood dysentery, severe blood dysentery, and left some medicine, but the medicine wasn't doing anything. So, he called in Bhavananda, and he's like, hey, make me this, and says, make me, some fried food. He's like, I want this. And Bhavananda's like, no way. Like, that's terrible for you. That's not going to help you. And he says, no, that's what my mom gave me when I was little for the same thing. So he said, I'll get my sister to make it. So Pishima comes in and she cooks it. And then, a few hours after he ate it, Prabhupada calls Bhavananda again. He just goes, I'm feeling better. And turns out mom was right. So then, I guess once he was feeling better, he gets a telegram from Shamasundra, who is kind of filling him in on what's going on in London. And it sounds like it's going to be a big to-do, right? Prabhupada's going to be picked up at the airport in a helicopter and then flown into this event. And it was going to be the greatest Rath Yatra festival ever held. And it was going to go, right through downtown London, right through all the important spots, through Piccadilly and end up in Trafalgar. And they're expecting millions of people to turn out for it, lots of VIPs. And on top of that, he was supposed to meet with Prince Charles to instruct him about Krishna consciousness as well.
Wow. Prince Charles is involved from that time? I didn't know that.
What's that?
Prince Charles is involved in Krishna consciousness since that time?
I didn't know he was at all, but yeah, that's crazy. But again, this is just another one of those like chains of events that makes no sense. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, oh, by the way, we're going to take you in a helicopter to George Harrison's house that he gave us. And, and then we're going to go in front of millions of people. This is a guy who's preaching to a dozen people in the Bowery of New York. He's now going to be in downtown London preaching to millions and the Queen's son. It's like,
wow.
It's crazy.
I wish I could see in that video if they had millions. I mean, a lot of people looks like they're expecting. Okay. Very good. Thank you. Nipa, you please read.
Some of the promises were exaggerated. Srila Prabhupada knew, but his desire to preach again in England was strong. George Harrison had given the devotees a large estate 45 minutes outside of London, and Prabhupada spoke of going there and installing deities of Radha and Krishna on Janmashtami Day. Yet even now, over a month before Janmashtami, he was feeling deeply affected by Shyamusundra's invitation. Although still exhausted from dysentery, he considered flying immediately to London. Calling in those GBC secretaries and sannyasis with him in Calcutta, sitting up in bed while they sat before him on the floor, Prabhupada asked their advice. They concluded that he should go to a healthier climate, Los Angeles or Hawaii, to rest and recuperate. Prabhupada mildly agreed, as his advisors decided Hawaii would be the best place, a place where the climate was ideal and where he would have few interruptions. Suddenly, however, he sat up straighter. He would return to the West, he said, but to London, not to Hawaii, and to recuperate but to preach. Not to recuperate but to preach. Let me strike while the iron is hot, he said. I think that is an English maxim. If you do that, then you can keep the iron in shape, and the West people are fed up. So we want to give them spiritual enlightenment. Prabhupada had immediately convinced his disciples with his forceful statements. There are two misleading theories in the West, he continued. One is that life comes up from matter, and the other is that there is no life after death. You can just enjoy this life. They say everything is matter. So as this Krishna consciousness movement grows, the communists will be curbed down. People say they are trying for unity, but they have no brains to see how this will achieve unity. They have formed a big complicated League of Nations and now United Nations, but they all fail. But this simple method of Ratha Yatra all over the world, it is spreading. Jagannatha means Lord of Universe. So Lord Jagannatha is now international God through our ISKCON. Therefore, I want to go to the West and give them these themes. Although, okay, so a tele. Uh, some of the promises were exaggerated, like Prabhupada knew that, and his desire was to preach again in England. George Harrison had given a state of large estate 45 minutes outside of London, and Prabhupada had spoken of going there and installing the deities of Radha Krishna on Janmashtami Day. And now, over a month before Janmashtami, he was feeling deeply affected by the Shamsundra's invitation. Though he was exhausted from dysentery, he still wanted to, he was considering flying to London. And calling in those GBC secretaries and sannyasis in Calcutta, while he was sitting in bed, they sat before him and Prabhupada asked for their advice, and they said Prabhupada should fly to the climate where it's healthy, so like Los Angeles or Hawaii, to rest and recuperate. Prabhupada agreed, but he was like mildly agreeing. His advice decided Hawaii, best place where he could, the climate is ideal. But suddenly Prabhupada sat up straighter and he decided to return to London, not to Hawaii, and not to recuperate but to preach. And he said, "Let me strike while the iron is hot." And this is kind of an English saying. So when you keep the iron in shape, that is how you keep the iron in shape. And the West people are fed up and they need spiritual enlightenment. And Prabhupada immediately kind of convinced his disciples with his statements. There are two misleading theories in the West, he said. One is that life comes from the matter, and one, there is no life after death, and you just enjoy this life. So they say everything is matter. So Krishna conscious movement, as Krishna conscious movement grows, the communists will be curbed down, slow down. So people say that they are trying for unity, but they are not using their brains to achieve this unity. And that is why they have formed a big complication League of Nations and now United Nations. But Prabhupada said they all will fail. And this simple method of Rath Yatra will help in spreading uh, all over the world. And Jagannatha means Lord of Universe. So Lord Jagannatha is like international God through ISKCON, and he wants to go to the West and give them these things.
So Prabhupada is very clear. Only your United Nations will fail until and unless you recognize Lord Jagannath. He's the international God. That's good. He said Prabhupada appeared physically unfit to immediately fly to London to active peace evited him. Accepting this is another miracle by Krishna. Okay. Prasanti?
London, July 7, 1973. Paravida, it was Radhayatra day. I saw Prabhupada coming into the temple and he didn't look very strong. I was really amazed, but I could understand that his strength was something spiritual. Dhruvanatha. At the parade site, we were waiting to receive Srila Prabhupada at Marble Arch while the procession starts. The Vyasasana was nicely decorated and everybody was expecting Prabhupada simply to sit on his Vyasasana on the cart and just ride through the streets, just as he had done in other Radhyatras. So it was to our great amazement and joy that when Prabhupada came, he refused to sit on the Vyasasana. He indicated that he would dance and lead the procession. Yogeshwara, they bought stairs up so Prabhupada could mount the Radha cart and sit down on the Vyasasana, but he waved them off and just started walking with the chariots, leading the dancing.
I think I have seen this video. Yeah. Good.
Dhira Santa, I twisted my ankle and couldn't walk. So I rode on the cart. Therefore, I could see Prabhupada very clearly. Revati Nandana Maharaja was chanting into the microphone from the cart. But after about 15 minutes of the procession, Prabhupada told the devotees to tell Revati Nandana Maharaja and the others to come down and lead the kirtan in the street with him. Revati Nandana. When Prabhupada saw his Vyasasana on the cart, he said, "No, I am just a devotee. I will go in the procession." We had a big, great Kirtana. Hamsaduta led, I led, Shyamasundara led, different devotees traded off, leading this fantastic Kirtana. And Prabhupada was right in the middle of the Kirtana with his Kartalas the whole time. He was dancing back and forth, jumping up and down and dancing. Rohini Nandana. The cart was going quite slowly. Prabhupada walked about 20 or 30 yards ahead of the cart, leading the procession. Meanwhile, the Kirtana was coming from the Ratha cart through microphones. Prabhupada called them all down and we got them all down himself and they were chanting Hare Krishna. Even so, even so often we would turn around and raise both his arms very majestically. Even so often he would turn around and raise both his arms very majestically in the air and say, Jaya Jagannatha. Sometimes we would get a little further ahead, so then he would turn around and wait for the cart to come on. Sometimes he was dancing, and sometimes he would stand raising his hands in the air. So in London, the Rath Yatra day started, and Prabhupada was coming into the temple. He didn't look very strong, but Paravida says that he was very much amazed with his spiritual strength. Even though he looked weak, he worked very strongly. And Dhruvanatha says Prabhupada's Vyasasana was nicely decorated and everybody expected him to sit and go through the streets. But this time, unlike other Radhyatras, he refused to sit on the Vyasasana and decided to dance and lead the procession. And Yogeshwara says that um, he says that the stairs were all ready for Prabhupada, but he waved them off. And so this guy, Dhira Santana, twisted his ankle and he was unable to walk. So he rode on the cart. And Revati Nandana was chanting, but Prabhupada told him to come down and walk along with the procession. And Revati Nandana says that multiple people led the Kirtana, Hamsaduta, Syamasundara, and himself led the fantastic Kirtana with the Kartas the whole time, and everybody was dancing up and down. Rohini Nandana says the cart moved quietly, but sometimes the devotees were ahead of the cart, but Prabhupada waited for the cart to come and they all went together. And sometimes he would turn around and raise both the arms and say Jaya Jagannatha.
Done? Okay, thank you. Yeah, Pranath Prabhu.
Yeah, Hare Krishna. Revati Nandana. When Prabhupada saw his Vyasasana on the cart, he said, "No, I'm just a devotee. I'll go in the procession." We had a big, great Kirtana. Hamsaduta led, I led, Syamasundara led. Different devotees traded off, leading this fantastic Kirtana. And Prabhupada was right in the middle of the Kirtan with his kartals the whole time. He was dancing back and forth and jumping up and down and dancing. Rohini Nandana. The cart was going quite slowly. Prabhupada walked about 20 or 30 yards ahead of the cart, leading the procession. Meanwhile, the kirtan was coming from the Ratha cart through microphones. Prabhupada called them all down and he got them all around himself. And they were chanting Hare Krishna. Ever so often, he would turn around and raise both his arms very majestically in the air and say, Jai Jagannath. Sometimes we would get a little further ahead. So then he would turn around and wait for the cart to come on. Sometimes he was dancing and sometimes he would stand, raising his hands in the air. Saradiya Dasi. Prabhupada would dance, and then after a few feet, he would turn around and look up at the deities with his arms raised. Then he would dance for a few moments, meditating on the deities, and then he would turn around and go on. In this way, he danced the entire way. The devotees held hands in a circle around him to protect him from the crowd. It was a wonderful, transcendental affair. Prabhupada was looking up at the deities, and all the devotees were behind him. Sudurjaya. Prabhupada surprised us. We didn't know if he was sick or not, feeling weak and dizzy or not. Sometimes he looked very ill, and sometimes he looked like an 18-year-old boy. He surprised us. He had his cane in his hand but raised it in the air as he danced. After a while, Shyam Sundara came up to me and said, Listen, he's not going to make it. Prabhupada is very ill. I want you to follow in a car. Be within 30 seconds reach so we can put Prabhupada in the car immediately. Prabhupada was going down Park Lane, and from time to time he would turn back and raise his hands. He was going so fast that he couldn't pull the cart fast enough to keep up with him. He would have to wait for the cart to catch up. He would turn back, raise his hands, and say Hari Bol. Several times he did this. He was going so fast that he had to wait. The devotees were dancing, the weather was beautiful, and the crowd was wonderful. So, Revati Nandan is describing, you know, um, that when Prabhupada saw his Vyasasana on the cart, he was so humbly said, I'm just a devotee and I'll go in the procession. And there was great kirtan, all the devotees were leading Hamsadutta Prabhu, Shyam Sundar Prabhu, Revati Nandan Prabhu. And then Prabhupada was in the middle of this kirtan with his kartals the whole time, dancing back and forth, jumping up and down. And then Rohini Nandan also recalls that the cart was going quite slowly, and Prabhupada walked ahead of the cart, and the kirtan was coming through the microphones. Prabhupada called all the devotees down, and they were all surrounding him and were chanting Hare Krishna. And and Prabhupada would often turn around, raise his arms, and look at the deities sometimes, chant Jai Jagannath, raising his hands in the air. And Saradiya Dasi further adds that Prabhupada would dance, look up at the deities, his arms raised. Again, he would dance, meditating on the deities, turn around and go on. So the entire way he was dancing, and all the devotees surrounded him in a circle to protect him. So it was a really very wonderful, transcendental affair. And then Sudurjaya, as Prabhupada was, they weren't sure if Prabhupada was sick, feeling weak and dizzy, and Shyam Sundar Prabhu told Sudurjaya that Prabhupada may not even make it. He's all the way like that, and he was very ill, and to be ready, following in a car and be within 30 seconds distance, so that they can put Prabhupada in the car immediately. And Prabhupada was going, time to time turning back, raising his hands, and he was going so fast that they couldn't pull the cart fast enough to keep up with him. And but he would wait for the cart to catch up, chanting Hari Bol, turning back, raising his hands, and it was really a very, very wonderful atmosphere. Weather was beautiful, the crowd was wonderful, all the devotees dancing.
Very nice. Thank you. Vijayanand Prabhu.
Dhruvananda. The passers-by were rooted to the spot, looking at Prabhupada. A man of that age, simply dancing and jumping in the air like a young boy, was the most amazing sight. And then every 5 minutes or so, Prabhupada would turn around and look toward Jagannatha. The devotees would clear the way so no one blocked his sight. And he had a perfect view of Jagannatha, Balrama, and Subhadra. But after a while, the police come and motioned that we could not keep stopping like this. We had to keep the whole thing going because the traffic jams were becoming critical. Devotees were crying and chanting and dancing, and there was a much commotion. Srutakirti. When Prabhupada was dancing, the bobbies kept on coming up and looking for someone official. Finally, they came to me and said, "You will have to tell your leader to sit down. He's causing too much of a disturbance. Everyone is becoming wild and we can't control the crowd. So I said, all right, but I did not say anything to Prabhupada. So then they came again and said, you must tell him he will have to sit down. So I said, all right. And I tapped Prabhupada. The whole time he had been in ecstasy, dancing before the cart and encouraging everyone else to dance. He would motion with his hands and encourage the devotees to keep dancing. He kept the momentum of the festival. So I said, Prabhupada, the policemen want you to sit down. They say you are creating havoc in the parade. Prabhupada looked at me, turned and kept on. He completely ignored it and kept on dancing, and they could not do anything. Prabhupada would not stop, and the police would not say anything to him. Paravida. I was distributing back to garden magazines along the whole parade route. I was exhausted, and I was having a lot of trouble keeping up with the procession. But Prabhupada was just there, and he was dancing like a young boy. I was amazed at his spiritual energy. Dhruvanatha. When we came to Piccadilly Circus, Prabhupada suddenly stopped the whole procession. Piccadilly Circus, of course, was just packed with people. For about 3 minutes, Prabhupada stopped the procession and just danced and danced with the devotees all around him. I'll stop it. So this describes the all those happenings at the parade, which is happening, the Rath Yatra. Here, like Dhruvanathas mentioned, like all the passers-by were all the people who are around there were looking at Prabhupada because of this that man with the age simply dancing and jumping in air, just like a young boy, and it was like an amazing sight. And every 5 minutes, Prabhupada would turn around and look toward Jagannatha, and the devotees made a clear way so that no one blocked his sight. And he had a perfect view of Jagannath, Balrama, and Subhadra. And after a while, a police government motioned that like they could not stop the Rath Yatra like this, and they insisted to keep it going because the traffic jams were happening and it was becoming critical. And also, Srutakirti here mentions that when Prabhupada was dancing, the bobbies kept on coming and looking someone official, and they told to her like, your leader has to sit down because he's causing too much of disturbance, and everyone is becoming wild, and they were not able to control the crowd. But Srutakirti did not mention anything to Prabhupada, but still again and again they come and mention that like you should they asked her like you should ask the leader to sit down. So he tapped the Prabhupada, and but Prabhupada like was encouraging everyone to dance, and he kept the momentum of the festival going on. And when it was conveyed to him that policemen want him to sit down, like but Prabhupada like completely ignored it, and he kept on dancing, and he would not stop, and the police could not do anything to him. And Paravida says that he was distributing backyard magazine along the whole parade road, and because of which he was totally exhausted, and he was having a bit trouble keeping up with the procession. But Prabhupada was like dancing like a young boy, and he was amazed of his spiritual energy. And Dhruvanatha mentions here, like when they came to Piccadilly Circus, like there was a like huge pack of people assembled over there, and Prabhupada suddenly stopped the whole procession. And for about 3 minutes, Prabhupada stopped the procession and danced with the devotees all over him.
That's wonderful. So we have a standard of festival. We all can see now.
It is so amazing to hear that Prabhupada never stopped. Only the police are like, please sit down, and he's like just dancing.
First time ever a guest of the theater. So that's right. Srikar?
Rohini Nandana. When we got to Piccadilly Circus, Prabhupada really started to dance. He was sleeping off the ground. The cart was stopped. It was very similar, actually, to the description in the Chaitanya Charitamrita of how Lord Chaitanya would lead the Rath Yatra procession. So the cart was stopped, and then Prabhupada would wait for it to catch up. Yogeshwara. When we finally arrived at Trafalgar Square and Prabhupada saw the big tent and the other arrangement the devotees had made, he held up his hands again. He had been dancing and walking the entire route of the parade. It must have been at least 1 hour that he had been walking and dancing, all the way from Hyde Park to Trafalgar Square. Rohini Nandana. When Prabhupada got to Trafalgar Square, he immediately sat down on the plinth of Nelson's column on a little Vyasasan and delivered a lecture about the holy name of Krishna. This was directly after his marathon of chanting and dancing. The next day's paper carried favorable news coverage of the festival, and Prabhupada wrote of it to a disciple in Los Angeles. You will be glad to know the Rath Yatra in London was very successful. The Daily Guardian had a picture on the front page of our cart and stated that we were competition to the monument in memory of Lord Nelson in Trafalgar Square. My health is good, and I'm taking daily walk and speaking at the class in the morning. In another letter, Prabhupada wrote, our festival here was very well received, and I was so much encouraged by the whole thing that I was able to walk and dance the entire way from Hyde Park to Trafalgar Square. Srila Prabhupada settled into a regular routine in Bhaktivedanta Manor. Here at Bhaktivedanta Manor, he wrote, the place is the nicest possible. It is calm and quiet, and the village is neat and clean. Prabhupada's room on the second floor was spacious enough to seat 50 guests comfortably, and its large windows overlooked the expansive grounds. Prabhupada said that if the devotees would clean out the lake and keep up the grounds, then he would stay always at Bhaktivedanta Manor and translate here in peace. They should get some cows, he said, and use some of the extra acreage for farming. So finally, all the devotees, and Prabhupada and the Rath Yatra cart arrived at the Piccadilly Circus. And then when they arrived at that spot, the Prabhupada started to dance. Really, he started to dance. He was like jumping up from the ground, up and down. And then that entire scene, like it reminded devotees of how the incident from Chaitanya Charitamrita of how Lord Chaitanya would lead the Rath Yatra procession. So the cart stopped, and then Srila Prabhupada would wait for it to catch up. And then another devotee, Yogeshwara, he recalls. So when they finally arrived at Trafalgar Square, and then Srila Prabhupada, when he saw the big tent and the other arrangement that the devotees made there, he held up his hand again. And then he had been, by then he had been dancing and walking the entire route, entire parade. And then it was at least 1 hour of dancing and walking. And then when Prabhupada got to that place, he immediately sat down on the plinth of Nelson's column on a little Vyasasan, and then he gave a lecture about the holy name of Krishna. So this class was directly after 1 hour of dancing and chanting. And so the next day, all the newspapers covered this whole event, and it was very well received, very favorable. Favorable people were all very favorable. And then Srila Prabhupada wrote to his disciples in Los Angeles saying that how this London Rath Yatra was very successful and was very well received by the people here. And then the Daily Guardian, that newspaper, on the front page, they had the picture of Rath Yatra cart. And Srila Prabhupada mentioned to his devotees in Los Angeles that his health is good, he's taking his daily walks, and he's also speaking at the class in the morning. And then in another letter, Srila Prabhupada also wrote that this Rath Yatra festival was well received in London. And then he also mentioned that he was very much encouraged by the whole thing. He was able to walk and dance the entire Rath Yatra parade, all the way from Hyde Park to Trafalgar Square. And then, so at the Bhaktivedanta Manor, Srila Prabhupada settled into his regular routine. So Srila Prabhupada, he writes saying that this place, the Bhaktivedanta Manor, is the most nicest possible place. It is very calm and quiet. Even the village was also very neat and clean. So Prabhupada's room was on the second floor of the building. It was very spacious, spacious enough to hold at least 50 guests very comfortably. And then his room has very large windows and it overlooked the expansive grounds. And then Prabhupada said that if devotees would clean out the small lake which was on that campus and then keep up the grounds, maintain the landscape there, then he would always stay at Bhaktivedanta Manor and translate there in peace. And then he mentioned that they should get some cows and then you use up the extra land for farming.
Prabhupada promised many places, isn't it? That he will stay. Sridhari?
Yes, ma'am. Although the devotees had not long been living in the manor and had done little to improve the buildings and grounds, Prabhupada pointed out a place where they could one day build a 30-story temple, the grandest building in all of London. He proposed that he stay for at least 2 months and install Radha Krishna deities on Janmashtami day. He would also oversee the construction of the temple room and altar. Every morning at about 6, Prabhupada would leave the manor for an hour's walk. There was no restriction as to who could join him, and sometimes as many as 20 devotees would trail behind, trying to hear anything he might say. Looking off toward the horizon, he commented that Lechmore Heath reminded him of Vrindavana. Prabhupada would walk down the lane to a place called Round Bush, stroll past a wheat field, and finally return to Lechmore Heath and the manor. A local policeman had become friends with the devotees and would regularly exchange greetings with Prabhupada. Particularly, Prabhupada liked the cleanliness of the little village, and he would often point out even the smallest pieces of trash on the manor grounds. The village, he said, was much neater than American towns. Shyamasundara had promised Srila Prabhupada many interested visitors, and Srila Prabhupada reciprocated, promising that as long as the interested people kept coming, he would remain in England. Each night, 1 or 2 guests, including scholars, priests, and occasional celebrities, would come and visit Prabhupada for a couple of hours. Prabhupada seemed especially eager to present the philosophy of Krishna consciousness to intelligent persons. As the world's foremost Vaishnava Parampara, philosopher of the Gita and Bhagavatam, he had thoroughly realized the conclusions of the Vedic literature. He was experienced in countering all challenges and aesthetic philosophies and knew what to expect from Christian, Mayavadi atheist, anyone. If a guest mentioned the name of a philosopher or school of thought unfamiliar to Prabhupada, then Prabhupada would simply ask, what is his philosophy? Inevitably, he would recognize the new philosophy for what it was, an old, familiar, mundane philosophy, with a new twist perhaps, easily defeated or brought to its perfection with Krishna consciousness. So even though the devotees did not live in the manor, they did a little improve the buildings and grounds. And once Prabhupada pointed out that, he found a place where he could build 30-story temple, which is the grandest building in all of London. So he said that he would stay at least for 2 months and install Radha Krishna deities on Janmashtami. And he also said that he would oversee the construction of the temple room and altar. So every morning at 6 o'clock, Prabhupada would leave the manor and go for a walk. So, and there was no restriction that who should join him for a walk. So sometimes there would be 20 devotees and they would try to hear as to Prabhupada would say anything. And so looking forward to the horizon, Prabhupada commented that the Lechmore heath reminded him of Vrindavana. So he would walk till the place called Roundbush, which is near the wheat field, and he would return to Lechmore Heath and the manor. So there was a local policeman who became friends with the devotees, and he would also exchange greetings with Prabhupada. So Prabhupada would particularly mention the cleanliness of the little village, and even he points out the smallest pieces of trash on the manor grounds. And he also said that it was much neater than American towns. So Shyamasundara promised Prabhupada about visitors, and Prabhupada said that as long as there are interested people coming, he would be in England. Including each night 1 or 2 guests who are scholars or priests and occasional celebrities, they would come and visit Prabhupada and sit for a couple of hours. So, Prabhu, can you explain from here?
Sure. So as Samsung had promised that big, important influential people will be joining, right? So Prabhupada reciprocal promising that as long as interested people kept coming, he would remain in England. So basically, he was taking a lot of interest, England is a very important place. Each night, 2 or 2 guest priests, they would visit. They would come and visit Prabhupada. A couple of Prabhupada seemed especially eager to present the philosophy of Krishna consciousness to intelligent persons. As the world's foremost Vaishnava Parampara philosopher of Gita and Bhagavatam, he had thoroughly realized the conclusions of the Vedic literatures. He was experienced in countering all challenges in atheistic philosophies and knew what to expect from Christians, Marvel, anyone. So think about it in one sense. Prabhupada literally leading the whole world. Even though there's some people are there, but actually he's very confidently, he's leading the whole world. He's confident. He's pure devotee. He's confident being Krishna conscious. So he is confident that he's leading the people in the right path. He can give the best of the philosophies to all over the world. So if a guest mentioned the name of the philosopher school or thought unfamiliar to Prabhupada, then Prabhupada would simply ask, what is his philosophy? So this is, he had taught before to his disciples. When some people say, do you know about this Swami, this Guru? So Prabhupada told, okay, just pretend that you don't know them. Because he didn't want to say negative about them. Rather, he would say that, okay, what is their philosophy? Then you talk on the philosophy, not on the person. Inevitably, he would recognize the new philosophy for what it was, an old, familiar, mundane philosophy. So basically, he won't condemn the person, but he will counteract the philosophy. That's how he taught his disciples how to deal with it, rather than attacking directly, saying that, oh, this man is bad. Prabhupada is very nice. Gaurang, you can.
Prabhupada was always eager to glorify and repeat Krishna's message. And with complete enthusiastic freshness, he would present again the same points he had presented many, many times before. He said he was like a cow that gives milk in any field. Put him in India, America, or England, he would always give the same nectarian milk of Bhagavad Gita. Prabhupada's entire day His early morning dictation of Chaitanya Charitamrita, morning walk, Bhagavad Gita lecture, talks with guests revolved around philosophy. In Scotland, when a man had challenged that God needed to be presented to philosophy, Prabhupada replied, "What do you expect me to talk? Some fairy tales?" Philosophy was necessary, especially for the so-called intelligent persons, whose minds raised so many intellectual doubts. And besides to always be telling others about Krishna, Prabhupada said was a symptom of love. Moved by compassion for others' suffering, Prabhupada always spoke the message of Krishna and never tired of repeating it. He was genuinely angered by the atheistic speculators who misled the people, because materialistic and impersonalistic philosophies ruin a person's chances of finding the solution to life's suffering. Whenever Prabhupada had heard anyone arguing the Mayavad doctrine, he would become like fire. He could not tolerate it. He had to correct it. When after one of Prabhupada's lecture at the Manor, a boy who had said he had heard someone calling the chanting of Krishna a little bit of bluff, Prabhupada replied, "Who says bluff? Who is that fool? Who is that rascal?" He had been ready to fight the atheists to glorify Krishna. These were Prabhupada's natural drives. Therefore, he could go on and on without stopping. He wanted to give people Krishna consciousness. He had no other life. Even while relaxing in the privacy of his room, he always spoke of Krishna consciousness.
Yeah. Then you can summarize.
So Prabhupada was saying that he was basically, wherever he would go, he would give the same message of the Bhagavad Gita. And the analogy was how wherever a cow is, in any field he goes to, the cow will give the same milk. Similarly, if Prabhupada's in India, America, England, anywhere in the world, he will still give the same nectar from the Bhagavad Gita. And Prabhupada's whole day was based off of just serving Krishna and preaching the Krishna consciousness. In the morning, he would always work on his Chaitanya Charitamrita, and he would take a walk. Then again, he would give a lecture of Bhagavad Gita, and then he would talk with guests about philosophy. And Prabhupada says that philosophy is needed, because if you don't talk about philosophy, what will you talk about to present what you are trying to teach others? And especially for the so-called intelligent people, philosophy is needed to help them understand what you're trying to preach to them or about Krishna. And this was telling others about Krishna was a symptom of love. And Prabhupada always spoke the message of Krishna, not just to benefit himself, to benefit everyone. And he was never tired of repeating it. He would always be ready to give any answer to any misleading people or any atheistic, materialistic people. And especially when Prabhupada heard someone try to fight back with the Mayavad philosophy, he would become like fire. He'd be really angry. He could not tolerate it because it was all wrong, and Prabhupada wanted to correct it immediately. Even when a boy tried to lower down the value of chanting Hare Krishna, Prabhupada was ready to fight the atheists just to glorify Krishna as a devotee should. And these were just Prabhupada's natural drives. His one mission was just to give people Krishna consciousness. And even if he was relaxing, he would be still speaking about Krishna consciousness to his devotees.
Very nice. It's an amazing that how his books are like law books for the thousands of years to come, and is going to be, because all the devotees community literally following Prabhupada's teaching, and we are being successful. So if whole world somehow takes Prabhupada is very bold. We can't, because he's direct associate of Lord Krishna devotee. So he was very fooling around. He was very confident in his teaching, and we are reaping the fruits of all his sacrifices. These were Prabhupada's natural drives. Therefore, he could go on and on without stopping. He wanted to give people Krishna consciousness. He had no other life. Even while relaxing in the privacy of his room, he was always spoke of Krishna consciousness. The devotee invited many prominent British citizens to meet Srila Prabhupada, and the responses were good. Economist Ernst Schumacher promised to visit, as did philosopher Sir Alfred J. Ayer. When Shyamsundar informed Prabhupada that Mr. Ayer was well known, Prabhupada replied, "What is philosophy?" Well, Shyamsundar replied, "He doesn't believe in the existence of God." "I will give him evidence," Prabhupada replied. "I will ask him what he means by the existence of God. I'll ask him to make a list of the deficiencies of God's existence." Prabhupada liked to meet with philosophical men and corner them and defeat them. That's why his name is Nirbhisesa Sunyavadi Paschatya Destaran, and we offer him prayers like this. His primary purpose is this kind of people are leading the world. Think about it, Prabhupada would not have been there, what would have been the society like at Krishna Consciousness Movement, these books. Already people are fighting like cats and dogs and leading the world as a blind man leads. So historians Arnold Doyen was old and invalid. Therefore, Prabhupada agreed to visit him at his residence, interested in discussing life after death. Dr. Doyen asked Prabhupada about karma. Most people, he said, were afraid of death. Prabhupada agreed and added that, according to a certain astrologer, one of India's recent leaders had taken birth as a dog. Can anyone guess who is that? So they were afraid they will go down, as he said. When Doyen asked if karma could be changed, Prabhupada replied, yes, but only by bhakti, devotion to God. So you all know, right? Who is that? Who is Prabhupada is talking about? India's recent leaders had taken birth as a dog. Do you all remember who he's talking about? Anyone? You know.
Indira Gandhi.
Sorry?
Indira Gandhi.
Nehru. Did we cover that? Or I read before somewhere. Nehru, he said that Nehru is take birth as a dog. You know, that's, he was very much pure. So here it says, and I know we have less time, but we will go through. He was always, his purpose, his appearance is to bring light to the citizens in this age of Kali. His contributions are immense, unbelievable, and he was never hesitating to meet with leaders, because leaders are the one who was influencing other people. So it was either change them or defeat them. And as a Vaishnava, you remain humble, you just engage in bhakti. But Prabhupada knows that this people's life is in great danger because of these blind leaders. He didn't hesitate to meet anyone. Even somebody who is the last man was historian Arnold Doyen was an old and invalid. So I said, okay, no, doesn't matter, I'll visit. And there's a conversation, and he's asking that ask Prabhupada about karma. So most people, he said, were afraid of death. Prabhupada agreed. But according to certain astrologers, karma may, because of their karma, leaders, they're becoming a dog. So they're afraid they will go down. So when Doyen asked if karma could be changed, Prabhupada said, yeah, of course, yes, it can be, only by the devotional service to Lord Krishna. So this is a great incident in London. It took place. Any quick comments? Anyone wants to share? We can take 2 minutes. But before that, I will announce that tomorrow His Grace Devikanandan Prabhu, I'll send the link tonight. Sorry, I couldn't send. Let's plan for tomorrow. Okay, any comments, any reflections?
Even though Prabhupada was ill, he participated enthusiastically in the Rath Yatra in London. One of the biggest Rath Yatra to happen.
Yes, thank you. Anything else? Anyone else? can take 2 more minutes.
I was gonna say, you know, like I had said before, just like that, just how all these events unfold, just never. Like I said, there's no other way to say it. Just doesn't make material sense, right? It doesn't. It's like how does that happen? You know.
Yeah. You cannot change even one man nowadays, right? It's so hard. Krishna has like he literally made it happen. Srikar, you are doing well. You've been becoming low. How about our all our heroes? Srikar and Vijayan, we all are doing okay.
Yes, bro. Yes, bro.
Okay.
Yeah, bro.
If you need some inspiration, you can talk to Nipa and talk to Prasanthi. They all will. Yeah, they're all enthusiastic. Talk to AJ.
Prabhu, we are following you.
I'm following Prabhupada. You all stay strong. You all stay healthy. You know, chant Hare Krishna. I promise to chant 192 rounds in 4 days. So basically, trying to 64 rounds every day. I have to finish 16 more rounds tonight. So please join at least these 3-4 days in case your rounds Mahamantri possible. Nipa, if you don't have a bead bag, we will send you. We will ship it to you. Just send me the address.
Okay, Prabhu.
We will send you beads also. Anything else you need?
I
Let
have
us.
the bead. Prashanti Mataji sent me the bead mala.
Oh, this is called nice. Thank you so much for taking. This is called Vaishnav. Vaishnav and Vaishnav taking care of others. And without hesitating, you did this. That's very nice. So thank you so much. So we will join tomorrow, okay? Hare Krishna. I'll send the different link for tomorrow. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah.